David often wondered when his marriage had slipped from warmth into routine. To anyone looking in from the outside, he and Claire appeared perfectly matched: a neat house in the suburbs, steady jobs, polite smiles at family gatherings. But beneath that surface was a silence that grew louder each year, the kind of silence where words were replaced with sighs and evenings dissolved into television glow rather than conversation. Ethan, in contrast, represented a world that still felt alive. He and David had been close since their university days, when long nights of laughter and shared dreams forged a bond neither time nor distance could dissolve. Ethan was magnetic, open, quick-witted, and disarmingly kind. While David built a stable life, Ethan traveled, pursued passions, and never seemed bound by expectations. Their lives diverged, yet their friendship remained the one constant David could rely on. It was Ethan who listened when David quietly confessed his frustrations. He never judged, never interrupted with advice wrapped in criticism. Instead, he offered space, patience, and the rare feeling of being truly heard. Claire, though not unkind, had grown distant, her affection buried beneath daily obligations and quiet disapproval of David's restless energy. Ethan's presence filled the emptiness in a way David hadn't dared to acknowledge. The more they spoke, the more David felt a dangerous comfort settling in. Their late-night phone calls stretched long after midnight, their voices soft in the dark while the world around them slept. Ethan asked questions no one else did. Are you happy? Do you feel seen? Simple words, yet they pierced deeper than Claire's perfunctory inquiries about groceries or bills. When Ethan returned to town after months abroad, David felt an anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. He told himself it was just friendship, the thrill of reunion. But the moment Ethan walked into the cafe where they agreed to meet, David felt his pulse race. Ethan's easy grin and steady gaze unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Their conversations flowed with the same effortless rhythm as always, but now there were pauses heavy with unspoken things. A brush of hands across the table lingered a second too long. A laugh ended with eyes locked a little too intently. Each moment carried the charge of something unacknowledged, like standing at the edge of a storm before the first strike of lightning. That evening, David invited Ethan back to the house under the excuse of catching up properly. Claire was away visiting her sister, and the empty rooms felt strangely alive with Ethan's presence. They opened a bottle of wine, sat in the living room, and drifted into stories of the past, old jokes, missed opportunities, youthful dreams. Hours passed unnoticed, the bottle dwindling as conversation grew softer, more vulnerable. At one point, David spoke of his marriage with uncharacteristic honesty. It feels like we're partners in logistics, not life, he said quietly. We function, but I don't feel connected. Not in the way I used to think marriage would be. Ethan studied him, expression thoughtful rather than pitying. You deserve to feel alive, David. Don't settle for silence. The words struck him harder than intended. They weren't grand declarations, but the sincerity behind them reached a part of David he had kept locked away. His chest tightened, not with sadness, but with a startling recognition. Ethan understood him in a way Claire hadn't in years. As the night deepened, so did the atmosphere between them. They sat closer than necessary, the air charged with something neither dared to name. The unspoken hung there, fragile and heavy all at once. David wanted to retreat, to protect the boundaries of his marriage, yet he found himself unwilling to step back from the warmth he felt beside Ethan. When midnight passed, silence finally replaced words. David turned his gaze toward Ethan, who held it steadily. For a suspended moment, time felt irrelevant. The world outside their small circle faded until only the two of them remained, bound by memory, trust, and something new that threatened to unravel everything David thought he knew about himself. He swallowed, unsure if he was about to speak or confess or retreat. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, "Sometimes I wonder if I've been living the wrong kind of love." The room stilled. Ethan didn't respond. His eyes lingered on David with a weight that said more than words could ever manage. That silence, pregnant with possibility, dangerous in its clarity, became a spark of something neither man could ignore. And though no lines had yet been crossed, David knew, in that instant the ground beneath him was shifting. The night, after their conversation, lingered in David's mind with relentless persistence. He replayed his words, the wrong kind of love, as though examining a secret he had finally spoken aloud. Ethan's silence in response was equally haunting, less a dismissal than an acknowledgement that something powerful had shifted between them. Over the next week, they found excuses to meet again. Coffee after work, a walk through the park under the guise of catching up. Each encounter carried the same quiet charge, a current humming beneath casual laughter. David told himself it was harmless. Yet he noticed how his heartbeat quickened at Ethan's smile, how his gaze lingered on the curve of Ethan's jaw or the warmth in his eyes. One evening, after a long day filled with tension at home, David drove to Ethan's apartment. Claire had been irritable, distant, and their conversation at dinner had consisted of nothing more than perfunctory remarks about bills and schedules. He needed air, he told himself. He needed a friend. Ethan welcomed him without hesitation, his presence an anchor in David's restless storm. They sat close on the couch, the glow of a single lamp softening the room. A movie played in the background, ignored as their conversation turned inward again. David spoke of the ache of invisibility, of feeling like a guest in his own marriage. Ethan listened, leaning closer, his voice low and steady as he reminded David of his worth, of the passion he still carried beneath the fatigue. At some point, their shoulders brushed, then remained touching. The contact was simple, innocent in appearance, but to David it felt electric. He shifted slightly, not away, but closer, and Ethan didn't move. Their hands found each other without intention, fingers grazing before interlacing. The world contracted to that single point of connection, fragile and thrilling. David should have pulled back. Every rational part of him screamed of vows, loyalty, the life he had built with Claire. Yet, the warmth of Ethan's hand dissolved logic, replacing it with a desire that had been buried for too long. Their first kiss was tentative, born out of hesitation and inevitability in equal measure. It lasted only a moment before David pulled away, breath unsteady. "This is wrong," he whispered. Though his tone betrayed more longing than certainty, Ethan's eyes softened. "Maybe wrong," he said quietly, "but it feels real." That truth unsettled David more than the kiss itself. For years he had lived by duty and appearances, but here in Ethan's presence he felt undeniably alive. They kissed again, slower this time, surrendering to what both had feared to admit. The days that followed blurred into a pattern of stolen moments. David invented excuses to step away from home, late meetings, errands that stretched longer than necessary. With Ethan, he rediscovered laughter, tenderness, and an intimacy that felt both terrifying and liberating. Their connection deepened. Physical now, but never merely physical. Every touch carried the weight of emotion, of recognition, of a bond that had always been more than friendship. Yet guilt shadowed every embrace. In the quiet after-passion, David's thoughts returned to Claire, the woman he had promised his life, to the partner who trusted him. He told himself he still loved her, though not in the way he once had, but each time he kissed Ethan goodbye, he wondered whether love for Claire was a memory rather than a truth. Secrecy became their language. Hidden messages, careful glances, late-night calls answered in hushed tones. The danger of discovery only heightened the intensity, binding them closer even as David's conscience frayed. He lived in dual worlds, one of stability and obligation with Claire, the other of fire and freedom with Ethan. The imbalance grew harder to contain. Claire noticed his absences, the distraction in his eyes, the faint scent of cologne not his own. One evening, as David scrolled through a message from Ethan, her voice cut through the quiet. "Are you hiding something from me?" The phone nearly slipped from his hand. He met her gaze, heart-hammering, words frozen in his throat. At that very moment, another message lit up his screen. From Ethan. "Can't stop thinking about you." The world seemed to close in. David stood at the precipice of exposure, the fragile walls of secrecy beginning to crack. Claire's question lingered in the air like smoke. David forced a smile, insisting nothing was wrong, but her eyes searched his face with a sharpness that made his stomach twist. For the rest of the evening, silence stretched between them, taut and suffocating. The walls of his home, once a refuge, felt like a cage closing in. The following days brought no relief. Ethan's messages arrived as steady as ever, short bursts of longing, invitations to meet, reassurances that what they shared was real. David answered them with trembling hands, exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. He moved through his marriage like an actor on stage, reciting lines without conviction while his mind drifted elsewhere. Claire noticed. The distance was no longer subtle, it was a wound bleeding through every interaction. The breaking point arrived one Saturday morning. Claire had been tidying the living room when David's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He was upstairs shaving, steam filling the bathroom, when her curiosity overcame hesitation. One glance at the screen shattered everything. Ethan's name glowing, a message that read, "I need you tonight." By the time David returned, Claire was waiting, phone in hand, face pale with fury and heartbreak. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice trembling but resolute. David froze. Denial felt pointless. The weight of weeks, months, of secrecy pressed down, leaving him exposed. "Claire," he began, but the words caught. His silence answered more loudly than any confession. Her tears came swift, anger-laced with grief. "After everything we've built? After all these years, this is what I mean to you?" The rawness in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. David tried to speak, to explain that it wasn't about betrayal, but about a part of himself he had long buried. Yet, even as the words formed, he knew they could never soften the blow. To Claire, it wasn't just infidelity, it was the revelation that her husband's heart belonged elsewhere, in a place she could never follow. That night, David left the house. He drove aimlessly before ending up at Ethan's apartment. When Ethan opened the door, David collapsed into his arms, the facade finally broken. He confessed everything. Claire knew. The truth was out. Their world was unraveling. Ethan held him, whispering comfort. But even in that embrace, David felt the weight of devastation pressing down. The days that followed blurred into arguments, confessions, and painful reckonings. Claire demanded clarity. Was Ethan a fling, or was this who David truly was? David had no simple answer. He loved Ethan, of that he was certain, but the guilt of shattering his marriage consumed him. He wanted to be honest, yet honesty meant dismantling the life he had built for over a decade. Ethan urged him toward freedom. "You can't keep living in pieces," he said one evening. "You deserve to be whole, David, and I want you whole." His words carried both love and desperation. Claire, meanwhile, vacillated between rage and sorrow. Some nights she begged him to stay, insisting they could repair the damage. Other nights she demanded he leave, unable to bear the sight of him. Their home became a battlefield of broken trust, every room echoing with the question of whether love could survive betrayal or whether it should. In the end, David made the only choice that felt true, though it brought no triumph. He left Claire, not for Ethan, but for himself. He could no longer pretend, no longer straddle two worlds. Yet, in stepping into honesty, he also stepped into loneliness. Ethan remained by his side for a while, patient and tender, but the cracks eventually reached them too. The weight of secrecy, guilt, and unresolved grief left scars neither man could erase. Their moments together still burned bright, but they flickered under the shadow of what had been lost. One evening, David sat alone in his new apartment, the quiet pressing around him. He thought of Claire, her laughter in the early years, her unwavering loyalty, the life they had built brick by brick. He thought of Ethan, his warmth, his understanding, the love that had awakened him. Both loves were real. Both were broken. In the end, he realized there are no victors in forbidden love. Only lessons carved into the heart, reminders of the cost of chasing what the world says you cannot have. His story closed not with resolution, but with reflection. Sometimes the most powerful loves are the ones that undo us, the ones that force us to confront who we are, even if it leaves us standing alone. And in that solitude, David finally understood love, in all its forms, was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be true, even when truth left nothing standing in its wake. The days after David's departure blurred into a haze of half-packed boxes and hollow silences. The house he once shared with Claire stood like a museum of their marriage, every photograph and trinket a reminder of vows fractured beyond repair. She did not ask him to return. He did not ask for forgiveness. The finality was unspoken, yet absolute. David moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, its bare walls echoing his solitude. At first, the space felt like freedom. No reminders of promises unmet, no constant weight of disappointment. Yet as nights stretched into weeks, he realized freedom could be as suffocating as confinement. The quiet no longer resembled peace, but an absence, a hollow carved by love lost. Ethan became his refuge, the single bright thread in the unraveling tapestry of his life. Their time together was tender, urgent, filled with the conviction that what they shared was more than desire. With Ethan, David rediscovered laughter that wasn't forced, intimacy that wasn't duty, and honesty unshackled by fear. For a while, he believed love could be rebuilt on the ruins. But ruins demand their toll. David carried guilt like a second skin. He woke, some mornings haunted by Claire's tears, her voice echoing in the memory of their last confrontation. No matter how deeply he sank into Ethan's arms, the shadow of what he had destroyed remained. Ethan noticed. His patience was generous, but even generosity has its limits. One evening, over dinner at Ethan's apartment, the tension surfaced. "You're here," Ethan said, "but part of you is still with her. You can't keep splitting yourself, David." His tone wasn't angry, but weary, the voice of someone who wanted more than half a heart. David lowered his gaze. "I don't know how to let it all go. I don't know how to stop feeling like I failed her." Ethan reached across the table, fingers brushing David's hand. "Maybe you didn't fail her. Maybe you just finally stopped failing yourself." The words struck with painful clarity. David had spent years living in fragments, husband, friend, confidant, secret lover, without ever claiming his whole truth. Now, even standing in that truth, he realized it had cost him everything familiar. Weeks turned into months. The relationship with Ethan deepened, yet trembled under the weight of David's unresolved grief. They shared joy, yes, but also arguments sharpened by fear of being judged, of being seen, of what the future might demand. Each fight left David more aware that love, no matter how passionate, could not erase the past. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Ethan, with tears in his eyes, told him, "I love you, but I can't be the reminder of what you left behind. You need to find yourself, David, not through me, but for yourself." The breakup was quiet, almost gentle, but it hollowed David anew. He had lost Claire, and now he was losing Ethan too. Not out of betrayal this time, but out of necessity. Alone again, David confronted the truth he had avoided. He could not rebuild his life on someone else's foundation. He had to stand in the silence and learn who he was without the roles, without the lies, without the safety of companionship. Some nights were unbearable, filled with regret and longing. Yet other nights carried glimmers of peace, a walk under streetlights, the discovery of forgotten hobbies, the first breath of acceptance. Slowly, David began to understand that love's greatest lesson was not possession but revelation. He thought of Claire, wondering if she had found comfort in family or perhaps a path to healing without him. He thought of Ethan, grateful for the love that had awakened a truth long buried. Most of all, he thought of himself, not as a husband, not as a lover, but as a man learning, finally, to live honestly. The story of David, Claire, and Ethan did not end with grand reunions or clean resolutions. Instead, it ended as life often does, with fractures, with scars, and with the quiet possibility of something new. As David stood at his apartment window one evening, city lights flickering below, he whispered into the night, not for anyone else but himself. I may have broken what was, but I am no longer broken inside. It was not triumph. It was not redemption. But it was a beginning.